Welcome to the Finding Elevation podcast, everyone. Joining me today is my friend, Courtney Heitter. She lives in Seattle with her small family, 2 mini schnauzers and her boyfriend. And she, like many of us, is a mountaineer. She's also a very avid trail runner. And then in her off time, spends a lot of time cleaning up beaches in Seattle, which I love as well. Courtney and we started working together about a year ago when you were training to climb Mount Fuji, which you summited. And then more recently, we climbed together in Ecuador, where you summited Cayambe. And you have a podcast, which is how we initially met. And so I want to talk about the genesis of your podcast, why you got started doing it, the messages you've shared with people, what you've learned from that, and also your experience as a mountaineer, because like most of us, started with modest goals, Rainier, you keep building upon that, learning more and more. You've got your sights set on even bigger mountains in the coming years. So I want to talk about that. And I want to talk too just about how you've learned through that process and this whole idea of someone not being qualified for something or starting something late in life, because we have similar backgrounds in that we were not athletic until, like, for me, it was really my 30s before I started climbing and pushing myself in the mountains. And that, I wouldn't say it's unique necessarily, but there are a lot of people in the mountain sports who have always been athletic, and they've always had that as something that they was a part of their life. They were, worked with coaches at a young age, trained hard at a young age. And it's a little bit different when you enter into this without that background. So I want to get your perspective on that. But initially we met on your podcast, which is called You're Not Qualified. So how did that idea of doing a podcast come up for you? And what have you learned and shared with people throughout the process so far?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me on so much. I'm very excited to talk to you in this space. We talk about mountaineering a lot, but I feel like this is like a dedicated conversation to it, and that's very exciting. You're Not Qualified started about 2-ish years ago. It was just about when the pandemic was raging. So maybe a little over 2 years ago. The initial genesis of it is I was trying to get into the tech industry, and I was working in a support position in tech, and I really wanted to pivot into product in tech. And I have a literature degree. It took me like 10 plus years to get my degree, which is a whole other story for another day, like a lot of economical reasons. But the thing that was holding me back, I think, from jumping sooner in terms of I'm ready to pivot my career more into the direction I want it to go, is I didn't think I was qualified to do it, because I would have conversations with folks and I would maybe talk about the direction I want my career to go. And I'd be like, you got to go back to school. You have to be a computer science degree. You have to go to business school if you want to be a product manager. And I was sitting there and, in a hard spot in my career, kind of just scouring LinkedIn for folks that have the career I want and looking at their background. And I'm like, that's not true. None of that is true. Like, there's so many people with such various backgrounds doing the job that I want.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was in tech to start with, I was like, the pivot's easier than not being in tech already. So I think that there's a disconnect here that I really want to talk to people about, because I'm doing it. And it's different than people are saying that it is. And I was like, how should I talk about this? It could be a blog, but blogs are kind of phasing out. And I don't really want to do that much writing, but podcasts are becoming hot. And I was like, okay, I think I should do a podcast about this. So it was born like that. And I talked to folks that were basically doing careers that they didn't ever go to school for or have like a specific background for. And now it's really pivoted, because my life has pivoted into so much like endurance sports. And now I'm like, oh, wait a second. And I have these things in my mind, these little offshoots that are like, you can't do an ultra marathon. You didn't run a mile in high school. Like, you were sick for every mile you had to run. And you're not an athletic person. But getting more into organized running sports and then doing mountaineering, and I'm like, okay, there's a trend here. Like, of course I'm qualified because I'm doing it. And now other people, I want them to know that if they want to be active, even though they were never active, like ourselves, they can absolutely do it. And that's that's been the pivot of it. I do still some career, but it's mostly I talk to people that are pursuing endurance sports, long distance running, biking, mountaineering.
Amazing. So what do you, going back to that point in your life where you were like, I want to get into tech, do something related to product. All these people are telling me that I'm not qualified or I need to have all this additional schooling or whatever. What do you think it was about you that was like, I don't buy that. Like, I'm just not, that doesn't click for me. That doesn't make sense for me. Have you always like kind of tested those rules or customary thoughts, or was there something different in this case?
That's such a good question. I'm not the personality to push back and disagree. But I think, and I haven't actually fully formed thoughts around this, I don't think, because now that I'm thinking about it, what I think it was is I was tired of people telling me what I could and couldn't do. And for my whole life, if somebody was like, no, you're not naturally good at math, you should go to study English in college because you're very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
I believed them and I did that. And I avoided everything I wasn't naturally good at in my life. And I think it was a turning point of, wait a second, no, not only am I passionate about this, right now in Seattle, that's where the money is. And why would I turn myself away by listening to these people over and over and over again when it hasn't served me, because I feel like I've been missing out on things. So I think it was finally a realization of screw that. Like, I'm going to do it anyways. And then I'm going to figure it out. It was just like, I'm going to figure it out. And I'm very much so, I write down my goals and I have like a North Star and what I want to get to. And so I have like career aspirations and I'm literally mapping it in a notebook. And I'm like, realistically, from where I am now, how can I get there in 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I'm on my way. And I'm like, okay, now I just have to stop believing what people say.
Yes. And listen to, and for me, it's been prioritizing that voice inside of you over what someone else is telling you. And it doesn't mean to discount advice, but it means to first listen to what's going on in here and use that to guide you in your decisions more sometimes than what other people are telling you.
Absolutely.
Someone also told me once that you should never take criticism from someone that you wouldn't take advice from.
I love that quote.
Yeah, I don't know who said that initially, but I think it's very true. And I think sometimes I would take it personally when someone said, like, you're not good at running, for example. I would put a lot of value in that person's opinion and I would take it personally. But thinking back, I probably wouldn't have taken advice from that person, but I gave a lot of value to their opinion of what I was capable of.
That's exactly it. And if I look back on people in my career path that I've met, in these companies, and they tell me, I don't think you're cut out for this. I think you should do this instead. I honestly, like, a lot of the times couldn't stand them as a person. So, like, why would I listen to that? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So, no, that's absolutely what it was. I just have to stop listening to these people that don't have my best interest at heart.
Yes.
They're just talking about their own personal experience. Like,
Yeah.
everybody's anecdotal,
Yes. And I think sometimes people see like there's one path to get to a product related job in tech. And you have to have this background and start here and gradually work your way up. And that's not true. We're all unique and we have unique backgrounds and jobs are unique. And there's not just one way to accomplish something.
It's like basically the tagline of my podcast, what you just said. We're all unique. We all need those unique perspectives at the table because it's so boring otherwise.
It is.
Just doing the same thing over and over. You're not thinking outside of the box enough.
Yeah, it is. And when I've led teams and even as I grow my business, I don't want people on my team who just agree with everything that I say or think exactly the way that I think or have the same background that I have, because you're going to miss out on so much experience and ideas and creativity.
100%. It's like the duct tape because you're an engineer. On Kayambe.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
That's going to be the title of this podcast. Tape.
Like, without your perspective, I wouldn't have made it.
So you started trail running, right? That was the beginning of your outdoor activities. And then that led to mountaineering. What was it that like sparked your interest into mountaineering?
So I had an acquaintance friend from Chicago. He was like, I want to climb in Seattle. We got in touch and he's like, I have permits for Mount St. Helens. This was in, I think it was 2017. It might've been 2016, but I was like, great. I don't know what that means, but I'm happy to come. And so I know I was like, I had no idea. I literally had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Because you didn't grow up in Seattle, right? You grew up in the Midwest. Like
no, I grew up in the Midwest. And at that point, I had been here, maybe like 4-ish years.
Okay.
So I had like caught drifts of people that like climb Rainier, and I'm like, that's something I could never do. But the guy was like, okay, I have 2 other friends that are coming with me. We're gonna go try Mount St. Helens. He's like, just so you know, this is like training that I recommend for this. I was like, okay. So I did like Peloton biking a lot, like just like cycling and some running still. And
Yep.
then I was like, I can lift some weights, and like I did like a form of CrossFit.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I think that'll be enough. And I was like, great. Didn't do any hiking with a pack or anything.
Oh
And
my
then
God.
I know. And then we get out there, and the 2 people that had come with us were just bombing up the mountain so fast. And this guy, he was so kind, and he stayed with me, and he was like teaching me how to rest step and how to pressure
Yes.
breathe.
That's awesome.
And he was like being really supportive. It was also in the middle of July. It was really hot.
Yeah.
And the Monitor Ridge Trail has no shade once you're out on the mountain. So we were cooking and basically just like hanging out on rocks like lizards. And I was like, I don't think I can make this because this is really hard. But he was like, no, you brought enough water. We can take it really slow. It's July. The sun's up till 10 p.m. We're going to be fine. And I was like, okay, great. So made it to the summit, the crater rim. I took a nap on the crater rim, which is still one of my favorite memories ever on a mountain. It was just like the sun right there, and like you can look down. It's so gorgeous. And in that moment, I felt like I was gonna die, but I also was like, I'm hooked, and I have to figure out how to get better at this, because if I want to do this, I can't suffer like this anymore, because it's like going to turn me around. And then from there, he came back to Seattle. We went up Mount Adams together. I ate the wrong food. I got sick on lunch counter, and I didn't make it to the summit. Each time I was hiking a hard hike or going up one of these mountains, I was talking to myself and trying to figure out what it is I'm missing that will make me a better climber. And then because I have such an obsessive personality, it's like one of my downfalls, because if I become interested in something, I have to be very careful, because I will just throw myself into it. I became obsessed with mountaineering.
Okay.
And I was like, how do I get better? How do I get better? And I hired a personal trainer, and then like another coach. And then I found you for Fuji. And I'm like, each time learning even more and understanding more about my body and how to be an endurance athlete.
Yep.
And very honestly, I'm literally just hooked. And if I didn't do it, then I think it would be like a part of me is taken away, because it's one of my things I've loved the most that I've ever done.
Yeah.
Even though it's so damn hard.
Do you think, so going back to that nap on the top of Mount St. Helens, so you had this really arduous day. It was probably harder than you expected. You didn't probably really know exactly what it would be like, but it was much more difficult than you had imagined. Yet something clicked for you that was like, I want to do more of this. Like, was that just that you wanted to push yourself more? That you, like, for me, when that happened, it was that I wanted to prove myself and what I was capable of. But I'm curious if you've thought back to what it was then that really, what caused that shift to happen.
I feel it was pushing against my adversity to pushing myself, because I didn't really ever push myself. I was like, if it isn't comfortable and I don't feel like I'm very good at it, I just won't do it. And there was something about being athletic overall for me that was like, I don't feel like because I don't have a background in it, it should hold me back. And I want the feeling that it gives my soul so badly of being in the mountains, being in just wild places that have no one around sometimes. It's such a special thing. And I didn't want it to pass me by. So it's also some form of mountain amnesia that a lot of people talk about. It's type 2 fun where I'm out there and I'm like, what the hell am I doing? And then I get to the bottom and I'm like, all right, let's do this again. It's like when I got down from Fuji, I literally texted you and I was like, I'm going to Ecuador. Even though this was like 12 hours in the pouring rain.
I love that. And I love, like, I talk a lot about what mountains have taught us. And it sounds like for you, it's taught you to know that just because you don't start out naturally good at something, that you can become good at it. And that you can also push yourself to do things, to do hard things, and it's going to be okay. It's still going to maybe uncomfortable, but in the end, there's a lot of benefit to being in that situation and pushing through it.
100%. And I was starting to see how it translates into the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's a coincidence that my career took off when I became a mountaineer. I really don't. I
Interesting.
think it was like I really wanted to become very proficient in mountaineering, and I'm working on that. And then I was like, I also really want to be in the tech space and work where I'm at. And it just like both of them kind of skyrocketed at the same time. And I was like, it's because I think of how I'm applying myself. And what the mountains are teaching me is one, like hard times will pass. What matters is what you're learning in the moment. And honestly, don't be a ninny and just do it. Like just literally just do it. Tell myself that at least once a day.
Well, we create these stories and excuses in our minds about how we don't want to be uncomfortable or how we're not prepared for something or it's not going to turn out the way we think it should. And if we let those stories take hold, it stops us from doing a lot of things. And
Absolutely.
I think being able to catch yourself in the middle of one of those stories and make a different decision is a big part of just being a good human and maturing.
It is. I've matured a lot, that's for sure.
I love that your career, that there's this parallel trajectory between your matriculation as a climber and your career. That's very cool.
It's been really fun to see. Sometimes it feels like I'm an observer and I'm like, wait a second, how is all this happening? But it's also the imposter syndrome talking,
Yes.
that happens.
Yes, it does.
But you're putting in the work and that's really what matters. And if you put in the work, you're going to get to really cool places.
And you're also showing other people what's possible, other people who might have been told they weren't qualified for something or thought that a goal was too big for them. And they observe you doing it and realize that they're capable of doing it too.
That's the whole point. It's like I let these limiting beliefs hold me back for a long time, and I want to catch people earlier than I caught myself.
Yes.
And it's like, you can do all of this, I promise you.
Right. And I also feel like just try it. Like often there's no harm or risk in just giving it a try, doing your best and seeing what happens. I was talking to another client earlier today and she was talking about how she gets very anxious before a summit, like on summit night. And we went back to another climb she had recently done where she didn't get nervous because she told herself this was just training. And so it's so incredible to me that the difference is all about how she was framing that in her mind. It was all about the story she was telling herself and the value she was putting on each of those climbs. And in one case, she got really anxious where she thought, the story was, I've invested a lot. I've spent a lot of time training. I have to get to the summit. And the other story was, I'm just going to see how this goes. This is all about learning and we'll see what happens. And she summited and she had a great time. And it just, our brains are so strong and they're such a big part of not just who we are in the mountains, but how we go through our day and what we think we're capable of and what we let rattle around in here makes such a big difference. It really
becomes really great muscle memory.
Yes,
you're like,
it does.
I've done this before. And that's really beautiful that she approaches it as, this is fun. Let's see what I can do.
Right.
That's awesome. Like that really would solve a lot of anxiety. That's for sure.
That happened to me before I went to K2 because there was so much had happened leading up to that climb for me personally. And my coach had stopped working with me and there was just a lot of emotion and a lot of doubt about whether I was ready for that climb. And I remember leaving for the airport. In hindsight, I would do this a lot earlier in the process, but like literally going to the airport to fly to Pakistan and telling myself, I'm just going to do my best and I'm not going to climb above my ability. And whatever happens is what happens. And it just relieved for me this pressure of I have to summit because I didn't anymore. I made my goals about something else and really like felt those goals and everything else. As long as I did those two things, I would be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a really poignant thought because I've had to kind of reframe that myself the person that climbed Helens and Adams with me helped me too. Cause he's like, I hate it when people ask me if I made it to the summit. He's like, because that's not really what matters.
Yep.
And I've kept that with me. And I'm like, yeah, the summit is so enticing. And of course I've wanted to in the past, and I've really beat myself up when I haven't made it. But the important thing is you are reframing what the journey is.
Right.
The journey is so amazing. And it's like, I learned more about myself in the times that I turned around than the times that I made it.
That is so true. And I wish more people would think about whether you're climbing or doing anything. Like maybe it's a project at work that didn't go the way you thought it would, but instead of saying it was a failure, I think it's much more productive to look back and see what you learned and then to apply that to another situation in the future.
Absolutely. And you can always do it a little different. It's just
Right.
for, the minds, like maybe we both have, you're just gathering more data and then you're determining it. And the more data you have, the better decisions you can make out there. But to get the data, you need to go out there.
You need to go actually do it, right? You need to have the experiment. How do you think about failure? I'm curious how you think about it or define it.
It's changed over the last couple of years. When I think my first major fail besides Adams, because don't eat mountain house meals for the first time when you're actually in the wilderness. Like they're great meals, but I shouldn't have done it the first time out there, a little tough on my system. I think I started to really have a better relationship with failure on Rainier. I was really excited 2 summers ago to tackle it. And I went up with a guide company and with RMI, loved the experience. I had to turn around at the Ingram Flats because I was having problems with my asthma. And I turned around with one of the guides and went back down to the camp at Muir. But then I had a really hard time that whole day because I was just beating myself up because I was like, was it really your asthma or was it anxiety? Because you were scared they were going fast. They were going to go faster because you're about to hit the disappointment cleaver. And I know you have to go faster up there. So it's like I was just in my head. I was completely in my head. And I was really hard on myself for being so in my head because it costed me my climb. But like we were just saying, after I've ruminated about it longer and been compassionate with myself, I've realized that I did what was best for me in the moment. And I did see it as a failure. And sometimes it depends on my mood. I'm like, I really shouldn't have done that. And it like kind of creeps in sometimes. But now I'm seeing failure as it's only a learning moment, right? And it's only a failure also if I let it stop me from pursuing it in the future. It's a failure if I'm like telling myself that I'm not qualified for this and I shouldn't be doing this. I'm going up again in September. Maybe if I still don't make it, then I just need even more data and I'll try it again. It's like, it's a very sometimes tumultuous relationship. But at the end of the day, I know that if I'm still trying, it's not a failure. If I'm not trying, then it might be qualified as that. But that's only because I've given up on myself.
I have a similar kind of framework for failure. I think that it's only a failure if we don't try or if we don't give it 100%. And I wish, especially in the mountains, I wish we would stop saying that you're unsuccessful if you don't stand on the summit, because I think that creates too much pressure, like we were just talking about. And there's so much more to the whole process of climbing any mountain than standing on the summit. And if you're paying attention, you're learning and growing all along the way, regardless of whether you get to the top or not.
Absolutely. And that's really, not to be cliche, but it's what matters.
It is what matters.
It's the journey.
Yes, it is. The word failure just has such a negative connotation to me, and I wish we would stop seeing it that way because there's so much more to it than that.
It is. It's hard to get out of those sometimes.
Absolutely.
But
yeah,
you're so right.
I was scrolling through your Instagram the other day. You said discomfort is the currency of your dreams. I love that. So how has discomfort, and we talked about this a little bit already, but how has that helped you reach your dreams or develop your dreams or see things differently?
Yeah, that quote I took from somebody that I had on the podcast. Her name escapes me right now, but she said it at the very end of our recording, and I was like, okay, that's the clip. That's it. Discomfort is the currency of your dreams. That's amazing. I have just grasped onto that for the purpose of the podcast and the purpose of just like pursuing stuff myself, because I love to say this over and over, probably so much that anybody that does follow me is annoyed. But what you're training to be uncomfortable well, because you are not going to escape being uncomfortable out there. Like I've tried, and you are just going to have to. And if you get really good at one thing, so say that typically I get blisters. I get blisters a lot. So I've had to understand how to get the best tape, break in my shoes correctly, wear insoles if I have to. These are things that I've been working on. And now I didn't have bad blisters on the last climb. But that is like one part. Okay, that's no longer uncomfortable. But what was uncomfortable is my gear failed. So that was like something that I couldn't predict. But the thing is, it's like I can't ever predict what's going to make me uncomfortable. But you have to lean into it because you can't avoid it. You have to just embrace it and be as ready as you possibly can be. But if you're ready to be like, this failed, or like, my gear didn't work, or this food made me more sick than I thought it would, that kind of stuff, you're just prepared to be unprepared. And then you can better work with it. It's almost like a mind shift for me. It's like, okay, because I wasn't expecting that, I know I'm preparing for the unexpected. So I'm just going to gather my thoughts for a second, feel sorry for myself just for a second, and then keep going.
Yep.
And that, if you lean into it, can take you so many places. And that's where the currency of your dreams comes in. If you just expect and deal with all of the uncomfortable, difficult situations as they are thrown at you, move past them, then you're going to get so far. Like if you avoid being uncomfortable, you're not going to move.
To me, there is no growth in your comfort zone. It only happens on the edges and beyond. And I feel like my goal as a human is to keep expanding those edges, like not just in the mountains, but in life and in anything, right? If I just stay in my lane and do what I'm comfortable with all the time, I'm not going to grow and evolve as a person. And that's a pretty boring way to live to me.
It is. And that was kind of where I was stuck for a long time, because I was just going down paths that people are like, you're good at this, you're good at this. Don't do this if you're not good at that. And it wasn't putting myself in situations where I could grow because I was too safe and I needed to get out of that.
Yeah, I love that. So you alluded a little bit to Ecuador. Let's talk a little bit for some context. Courtney and I climbed together in Ecuador as a part of an all-women's expedition just a couple months ago, less than 2 months ago. And I love being in the mountains with women for many reasons. And this was a really fun expedition because we all had trained together. We all knew each other, and I had a great time in the mountains. And I remember, if I can give away a little bit of your secrets, you were worried about your speed relative to other women on the team who were pretty speedy. And I remember saying to you that elevation is a great equalizer, and it helps us. It doesn't matter if you're man, woman, how much you trained or not, we're all going to be affected by the elevation. And in the end, you stood on the summit and summited in great style and had a great time. But there were some bumps along the way. So speaking of unexpected things, tell us about your gear situation on summit night.
So I put my crampons on. We're gearing up to get on the glacier. And we are, the whole glacier is ahead of us, basically the whole mountain. And I step on the glacier, we start walking, and pretty much immediately the crampon on my right foot falls off. It just goes to the side and my boot is not in it anymore. and I Meche, our guide, she's amazing. I hailed her and I was like, hey, my crampon, can you help me fix this? And so she comes back and we tie it a little tighter. And we're like, okay, it probably is fine now. And we keep going. And we didn't get very much farther and it broke again. So the underside of it was these two pieces of metal with with the holes in it, and the little piece of metal that's supposed to size it and stay.
Right.
It didn't stay. So those two pieces were coming apart and then breaking the crampon. I was really down on myself because I turned to Meche and I was like, even if we do fix this, I don't feel comfortable continuing and you should turn me around. I was like, because if I'm farther up and it's just the three of us on a team and it breaks again, how am I supposed to get down? With one crampon? Probably is possible, but I was really scared. I was so scared in that moment. And I was like, I have to turn around. And Meche looks at me, but she's like, no, it's fine. We're going to fix this. You come with the duct tape. And you're like, hey, I actually have duct tape in my pack. And what if we just tape it? And Lucy, the other guide, was like, I think yes. And so she tinkers with it and she duct tapes it and they put it on and it's solidly staying and they wrap it really tight and it feels great. But I still turn again, this time to Lucy. And I was like, Lucy, I don't feel comfortable anymore. I'm scared. And I want to turn around. And it was like this really like almost a dark place I went in my head where even though it was super beautiful out, I was just so terrified of being out there with something that was like maybe not going to perform in the way I needed it to sometimes literally save your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I also was like, oh, I'm comfortable and my bed's back there, and like my book's back there. And I was like, I could just like go and sit in the bunk and wait. But after I told Lucy that I want to turn around, she looks me dead in the eye and she's just like, no. But it was such conviction that I was like, okay, that's not an option anymore. And everybody in the group at that point too was like, Courtney, just try to get to the next glacier.
Mm-hmm.
And Matchie's like, if you get to the next glacier and it breaks again, we'll turn you around. She's like, but if you get to the next glacier and it's fine, you're probably fine for the climb and you're going to be okay. But I was still like, okay, like that's fine. And I was kind of like a middle schooler that's like, I have to clean my room or something before going out. I was just like so mopey. And I was like, what is wrong with me? But I ended up coming to and really getting my act together past that second glacier, the point they said we can cut off here, and
Mm-hmm.
look down at my crampon, like, part of me might have hoped that it was broken again. Like, I was just
Really?
like, I just feel like I didn't really want to do it anymore. And it was so weird. And then after that, though, we started to like actually get a little bit higher elevation. And I was like looking around and like you could see the really insane crevasses and the beautiful formations
Mm-hmm.
of like Cayambe's intensely beautiful. Like I've never seen just like drapes of icicles like it
Yeah.
has. And it was just so gorgeous. And I was like, okay, no, I'm okay. Like this is like a fairyland. And then everything was fine since then. And the crampon's literally still taped. And to be honest with you, I might try it again, like just to see, because it's so good now. But I might also have a backup pair just in
You
case.
probably get a
Or more
backup pair just to be
yeah.
to be sure it's 100% solid. But
Yeah.
that situation is sort of the opposite of what we were talking about earlier, where people are telling you weren't qualified for something in your career, and in the case of Kayambe, you were saying, I don't think I can do this, and it was
Mhm.
someone else, other people who believed that you could do it.
Yeah. And I think I'm glad you called it out. It's such like an important part to have people around you
Yeah.
that are rallying for you. And also it was a really good lesson for me because I try not to listen to people's opinion, but it's a really good lesson for me to listen to people when they believe in you more than you
Yeah.
believe in yourself. Without you guys, I wouldn't have made it up there, honestly. And yeah, it's not the end of the world if I didn't, but it did something so integral for me as a person in my soul where I was like, okay, I had a really tough time
Mm-hmm.
internally. I was feeling very sorry for myself. I rallied, I made it happen,
Yeah.
and I'm better for it. So it was like a pivotal moment. I needed that moment, honestly.
I think it is absolutely important, not just in the mountains, but in life, to surround yourself with people who believe in you, who have got your back regardless of the
Mhm.
situation. And I think also who will be honest with you regardless of the situation, right? That they'll be honest with you to say, I know you can do this, even if you can't see it right now. And also, especially in the mountains, people who will say, the weather, I know you really want to get to the summit. The weather's bad. I'm seeing, you look like you're a little calorie deprived, and who will throttle things back if you're not able to do that either. It's one of the things I love about mountaineering is that it's like people, I can't disagree that it's an individual sport, but the team aspect of it is so important. And I think that's what makes us successful so much of the time.
I agree. And if you let those people tell you their opinion when they are roped to you, when
Right.
your performance is dependent, like everybody is dependent on your performance, and it's often a safety issue if they feel like you're not up to it, especially a guide. That's why for a lot of beginning mountaineers, for my podcast, I'm like, go with a guide because they will teach you so much and they will also be completely honest about your abilities.
Yeah.
But I think your friends would too, of if it feels off, especially if they are also climbers and they've been out a few times and they have some sort of
Right.
perspective. they know, and most people will be honest with you either way.
Right. And just listening to that voice when sometimes the voice inside of us that thinks we can gets overwhelmed by other factors, and being able to listen to someone else who says you've absolutely got this and you're capable of doing it.
I mean, you were a big voice of that for me because you were like on the team right behind me, on the rope, and you're like, you're gonna be fine. Like
Yeah.
and I'm like, no, like I feel like maybe I'm not fast enough already. And you're like, you are fine.
It's one of
Everything's fine.
the hardest things for me as a coach is sometimes to convince people that they're capable of something that they don't think that they
Can
are.
only imagine. I mean, I can only imagine. I've grown a lot since working with you, but
No.
as I just said in this story, it still like creeps up on me sometimes. But thank God you were literally physically there this time, or else I would have like channeled you. Like, what would
It,
Lisa say in this situation?
it's really fun for me to help people develop those skills. Like as a coach, I don't intend to work with someone forever. I intend to work with them to give them the skills they need to accomplish whatever their goals are. And then you can then do it on your own because you've got all that skill and ability, and hopefully you even pass it on to someone else. So it keeps just propagating like that.
Yeah, I want to spread it everywhere.
Yes. So I'm curious, because you weren't athletic, as I was also not athletic. Do you think that changes your motivation as an adult who is now an athlete?
I would say absolutely. I feel like if I were to talk to somebody who grew up athletic
Mm-hmm.
and I think of how I think of my body and my capabilities, it is very different, but also we have the same goals,
Right.
right? So it's like they had the goals of they needed to build a base, literally a physical base,
Mm-hmm.
and then build on top of that for their specific sport. I'm building a base, and then I'm building on top of that
Yep.
for the specific sport. So, yeah, it's like I definitely view it almost more of, I wouldn't say more of a part-time job than they would, but I feel like because I have so much to catch up on because
Yeah.
they built their base so long ago that I take it very seriously, and also maybe a little bit too serious compared to them because it's just so much more natural for their body to be athletic, and it's not natural for my body to be athletic. So I kind of have to like feel like I'm trying to force into a headspace maybe more than they are,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
And I think when you come from that, like if you feel like you're behind, then it
Mm-hmm.
makes success, whatever that looks like for you, even sweeter, I think, because the goals that I've accomplished that I had to work the hardest for are the most important to me. If something just sort of lands in your lap, it's easy to be like, to not be grateful for it, or to not look back and think how hard you had to work for it and how much you had to accomplish, or how much you've gained as a result of that.
That's such a good point because it brings me back to thinking about my Helen's climb and those two people that just bombed up the mountain. And it was like a walk in the park for them.
Right.
And not saying like that climb, it might still resonate with them in a very special way. But I would wager that it resonates with me in a more special
Yes.
way because I fought for my life on that damn
Yes.
mountain.
Yes.
And they literally, because they floated up it like they were elves. I was like at the top, I was like, what, how are you guys so fast and so nonchalant? They're like, oh, like we do rowing together, and like I was a runner in college, like we did track together. And they're like, yeah, it's just not a big deal. And whereas I'm like so grateful that I'm still literally able to put one foot in front of the other. It's very different perspectives. Love to have their perspective, but I don't.
And I think the perspective of having to fight harder is much more meaningful. A few summers ago, I took some cancer survivors up Mount St. Helens. And for many of them, that was a really big deal, right? They've never climbed a mountain before. Some of them were still actively in treatment. Like it was no small feat for many of them. And I was paired with the woman who was having the hardest time getting up. And she at the end was just really down on herself because everyone else was already back at camp and having a nice meal, and she was still on the mountain. And I said to her with all seriousness that your day is so much more meaningful to you because you've had to work hard for it. And not that they didn't work hard, but when you're spending 12 hours climbing Mount St. Helens, you're gaining so much more from that experience than someone who, as you said, just floated up there. So I think, going back to failure, we forget if something's not put in the success category or the win category, we often overlook how much we gained in the process. I think it's so important. I want to eradicate the word failure from our vocabulary.
I completely agree because, for a long time I was like, I failed because I suffered too much. And then it's like, that's crazy. You're successful because you're leaning into being uncomfortable and you're doing it again. And I've done Helen's 5 times since then, I think. And does it get easier each time? No. It's a hard mountain.
But you learn a lot. You've learned a lot in the process. And now I'm sure the way you feel when you go up this summer will be very different than the way you feel when you went up that first time. And now you're training for even bigger goals. What's your next big thing?
Rainier again in September. And then in 2 years, probably May of 2027, Denali, which I'm very excited about. I'm so excited. And there's a lot that needs to happen in between now and then. And I think I'll probably try to get something in there that is more expedition style, maybe like Aconcagua, or even I would love Kilimanjaro. So maybe either of those and just keep going after that. But we'll see.
One mountain at a time.
Yes. And I get a little crazy obsessive about it, but it's type 2 fun. You're really excited and then you're out there.
Yeah. And it's horrible, but you look back and realize how much you grew as a result of it.
100%. Yes.
Have you thought, and this might be putting you on the spot a little bit, but have you thought about what your goals are for Denali? What you personally hope to accomplish from that mountain?
I honestly hope to get out there, and I just don't want to turn around. That's basically if I can get out there and completely immerse myself in the experience of walking with a lot of weight, eating, sleeping, reading, repeat, and be so content with doing that for 3+ weeks. That's what I want. I want to be content with shutting off and being okay with no cell service and not having the option to just be like, I don't want to do this anymore. Being okay with that.
Yeah.
I just internally, I want to embrace the suck.
I like it said, I don't want to turn around. I'm writing that down because I'm going to hold you to that.
I love it. I want to love it. I want to love every aspect of the really tough climate out there.
Yeah. Well, you will learn a lot from that mountain and every mountain, as you already have. Anything else that you want to share with people before we conclude?
I really want people to believe that they can do everything we're talking about. And if you want to start somewhere, just start with a really hard hill in your area and train there, and then look for guided climbs on glaciated peaks. But one thing I really, really want to hammer into people is if you're sitting here thinking, I could never do what these women are doing, or I could never climb a mountain, that means you should try.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that. And thanks for everything you're doing to show people, especially women, that it is possible and that they can do it, and that there isn't this qualification that they have to meet ahead of time. It's just about getting out there and trying and learning and paying attention.
100%. And honestly, if I can do it, you could do it. I know people say that all the time, but I mean it from the depths of my being.
It's been really fun to chat about these things. I really appreciate your time and your insights. And we'll link your podcast in the show notes so people can check you out there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Thanks, Courtney.